Hi everybody. We have got Roger Burton today, actually, who is an authority on business process management, business architecture. He's the founder of an initiative called BPTrends. He is the co-author of the Business Manifesto, along with Ron Ross and John Zachmann. He runs his own company called the Process Renewal Group. It started way back in the 90s, and he's consulted for several big and large firms across geographies. He's an author of a book on business process management and brings across a rich legacy of consulting using business process management and business architecture practices as it's known today. So we shall actually gain from his insights on business process management and business architecture and its increasing relevance in today's age and time when people are getting disrupted by epidemics and environmental issues, and people don't, companies don't know where to turn around to tackle disruption. So what is the secret sauce to, from the business process engineering side of things, and how do we actually rework? So we're going to talk about all of these things with Roger Burton himself. Who's here. And good morning, Roger. I think, as you said, it's a cold, not so very bright day out there at your place in Vancouver. So please walk us through your interesting journey, how you actually started as an industrial engineer, graduated from the University of Ottawa, I believe, and how you started up and landed up at an R&D division, and then you started a firm which got bought over by another company, and finally you started another company of your own. How much of the industrial automation journey actually influenced you into your consulting work now? And so it'll be quite rich, and it'll be a nice, thing filled with a lot of aha moments, I'm sure, because it's not a journey that many traverse. It's quite an interesting journey that you've had. Please walk us through that.
Thanks, Kiran. Yes, I think the beginning of all this was deciding to become an industrial engineer. I started out in aerospace engineering and decided that really wasn't for me. So I went in and decided to take industrial engineering. And my undergraduate work was at University of Toronto. It's very interesting because that's been quite a lengthy turnaround, because now I'm teaching the classes at the same university in the same program.
Oh, okay. Life has gone full circle.
It's gone full circle. So now I'm teaching 120 industrial engineers how to apply business architecture, business processes, improvements, and a way to look at the business world, not just the engineering side of things. So it's quite rewarding to have come around that. But at the beginning, I started as an industrial engineer, ended up doing quite a bit of work in a number of organizations, including a little bit in the Canadian federal government, trying to apply improvement techniques and better ways of doing things for the services that the government's provided. I was there for a few years, and then I decided that I wanted to sort of go out in another direction. I didn't want to spend my whole career there. So I went out and joined a consulting firm, and ended up managing a consulting branch pretty quickly. And then we had a software product we'd acquired, and managed research and development for that particular software product. And that product definitely kept me going on the path of how can we do things better. And I think that's sort of very much in my nature, to always be looking for things to do better. I think some members of my family say I should leave that at work and don't do it at home. So, but it sort of comes with the territory. I think that you're always finding better ways to do things. And so I started work as a consultant, where very much focused on how can we change the business so we can implement better information technologies. And then gradually move much more into the business side, a bit more strongly with business processes. And in the early 90s, starting to do a bit more work in analysis and design of business processes. Built that out to process architecture in the rest of the 90s, and then year 2000 hit, and all kinds of people decided not just to change their software, but actually to improve how the organization ran. So from that point in time, we started focusing very much on process architecture. But then as we did that for a while, it was really, really clear. It was clear to me that you couldn't only look at processes, you had to look at a lot of other things. Information was critical. Your information technology capabilities were important. Human resources were important. And so a variety of other things sort of started to come into what I was just naturally doing. And it just seemed normal to be able to do that. And before I knew it, I discovered that we could actually have a name for it, which we call business architecture. And so it was around that time that I wrote the book on business process management, profiting from process, which did quite well in the first 10 years of the new millennium. Sold well, and I managed to get a bit of a name based upon that, because what I was trying to do all the way through this was just to be practical. I think that was the engineering side coming out. Try to be practical. Don't be too academic, or don't argue too much about methodology, because that can become very academic as well. And so that's why I've always enjoyed doing the consulting work, because every consulting scenario is different. I've worked in so many different industries, in financial services, in manufacturing, distribution, government, and a variety of other telecommunications, a bunch of other fields as well. But the interesting thing, in all the way through that, even though everybody thinks they're unique, they're special, we found a lot of common patterns, and the problems were pretty similar. The models were different, but the challenges were very, very similar. And so I think that's where I'm very, very proud of the work that I've been able to do in both teaching and also in helping establish some of these sort of standardized reference materials, like Business Agility Manifesto. I was also involved in coordinating the Business Process Manifesto as well. To basically lay out some principles. And I think that's the one thing that I've been able to do, is to stay principle focused, because those principles will always serve us well. Whereas trying to find special tricks or techniques or little traps or one piece of software here and there, there's never going to be the answer. So something else will always come along, but the principles will stay. So I think that's where most of my practice has been over the years. I do find that the problems that I've seen are universal, or at least global. I don't know about the rest of the universe, but no matter where I go in all various countries, all around the world, a lot of similar challenges. And everybody, I can guarantee this, everybody is doing this. Everybody is starting to do something around business architecture. And people are trying to get their processes much more effective, much more efficient, and also much more adaptable to change.
True. So I think, given that, how was it once you started wearing a consultant's hat post your work gigs? How easy was it to find work? Was writing a book a trigger for getting yourself known to more people? Or it just so happened that you had a set of existing clients who already knew you, and you got one gig after the other? Or how did that transition work actually?
Well, it was a bit of a combination of those things, because I decided fairly early on that I really didn't like sales. And trying to sell services is a very difficult thing. You can't just lay out all the features and the benefits. People have to have confidence in the person doing the work. And that's good and bad. And the good part is that you can find work. The bad part is sometimes they only want you as opposed to somebody else who can do parts of the work really, really well. So what I discovered early was that I would try to document what I'd learned and present that at conferences, write articles. And the book was definitely a big help forward in all of that. But to build the credibility by showing people that there's certain things that can work. And so I can proudly say that in 25 years of the last 25 years, I really haven't made any cold calls. I haven't had to call on someone and say, you may not know me, but we have all these great services. By being visible, by being out there and having a readership and an audience, that actually generates a lot of work in its own right. So that's the mechanism that we would use, that I would use, excuse me, that I would use to be able to attract people, and also know that if someone is attracted to what I'm saying, it means I don't have to sell them on the idea in the first place. There's some interest, I've touched some nerve somewhere, and we can just talk about how can we solve problems, as opposed to why are we a good company or a bad company, and why should you take me over somebody else? So I think spending time on I won't say just self-promotion, but just being visible, being credible.
I think this was all during the time when there was no social media, or there was no only word of mouth perhaps, and there was no LinkedIn and none of those things.
At the beginning, that's absolutely true. And you did say something before, like, did you get repeat business? Well, we have clients that we've worked with for over 20 years, and they keep calling us back.
Okay.
And in addition to that, when somebody you work with and have a trust relationship with ends up going to another company, quite often they're faced with a big challenge and then they call you in. So that's a nice way to do it. And also it means that most of the clients that I have actually end up being friends, or there's several people in our group right now who used to be clients, but now they're working with the group because they like the way we do things. So it's a very natural way, as opposed to being forced and having a lot of pressure.
True, I think a very organic way in which you've grown actually over the years.
Yeah, and that's what I've enjoyed maybe the most about my career, is that I've been able to do good work, do it with people I like, and make a difference.
True. So how did your family take on this when you switched and started wearing a consultant's hat? So I think at least the first 1 or 2 years, you would have to prove yourself to win the market and get clients. So they were all okay with that.
Yeah, I was lucky that when I left the company I was employed by, at that point in time, I did have one major contract, it all lined up, ready to go. And so that gave me a year of room to sort of figure out what I was going to do. And so I find the big challenge when people decide they're going to go into consulting is they think you can just go and be a consultant. True. There's more than subject matter knowledge is needed. You have to be able to do a lot of other things. So you have to be able to say to yourself, I'm comfortable if I don't make any income for 3 months.
True. Because
you don't have the security blanket that you might have had in your previous job. So it's a big step for anyone to make that move, I find.
Yeah, I think that leap of faith very early on is very difficult for a lot of people, as you said. It's not just because you know things, it doesn't mean you'll get invited to solve people's problems.
But everybody I know who's done it, myself included, everybody has said, I should have done this a year ago.
Yeah, where is the next best time to do it?
It's the step that's the hard one.
Yeah, where is the next best time to do it? They say it's yesterday. That kind of stuff.
Exactly.
So actually, how much of modeling does work when you consult with clients? Like, do you use any formal modeling notations like BPMM or UML for that instance, or Archimate, which is combining enterprise architecture with business modeling? What's your take on how much of, or is it like you're as good like draw on the backside of the napkin, what they call it? So what does that work?
Yeah, I think that at the beginning it's always scribbling on the wall, but these days it's harder to do that. But turning that into a set of formalized models is useful. True. Because that way at least you can understand what the notation you're using, what it's representing, as long as you basically name things properly, which is one thing that people don't do very well. They're very, very bad at naming conventions.
Correct.
For example, if it's a process, it should have a verb, not a noun. If it's data, it should have a noun, not a verb. And so just simple naming conventions. And using some modeling techniques. The big challenge is using the right one for the purpose. And so I believe very, very strongly that the model is a means of communication. It's an abstraction. It's not the real world. And as a fellow called George Box said back in the 80s, he said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So because it's not the reality, but it helps you communicate, helps you validate, helps you share with a number of different people. So, but if you use a consistent notation for a particular audience, then I find that really works really quite well. Things like BPMN, very good notation for the purpose of being more detailed in a process workflow. But if you're doing a process architecture, just hierarchical boxes work probably better. So whereas what I often see is people will pick a notation and try to use it for absolutely everything and not be aware of the audience they're talking to. I don't want to show BPMN to my chief executive officer client.
True. It gets too technical and very intricate for them to figure out what's really happening out there. So, yeah, we at the strategy level, perhaps you don't get to that discussion right away. Maybe only deep down when you're helping clients the trenches, maybe they will need that. So otherwise, I think it would be boxes and arrows pretty much, right? That would be good enough.
Yeah, I think they are for the most part. And again, if you're describing the information of the organization, the box is going to be different than the box will be for a process, but still you have boxes with things in them which are connected to other things, and there's a relationship among all the pieces. And so being able to convey that in a meaningful way and be able to play it back to people and say, this is my understanding as a consultant, this is my understanding of what I thought I heard. Did I get this right? Or to be able to say, well, this is what you told me, but it logically doesn't make sense. Can we investigate that a bit more deeply? Do I not understand? Or is it just not an accurate depiction of what really happens in this organization? So it's that ability to communicate and get a common understanding. Even a common definition of what words mean is hard to find. So
I think understanding the common metaphor or the taxonomy within an organization is a huge, as you said, somebody calls it a process, somebody else calls it a function, and somebody else calls it a service. So once they get mixed up, it's very difficult to carry on the conversation.
And within the business architecture community, there's been a raging debate for 10 years about is a value stream and a process the same thing?
True.
And there are people who argue very strongly that they're two completely different things. And other people say, well, it's just the same thing. Why would you make them different? And so there's that professional level of lack of consistency or commonality. And so depend as a consultant, depending where you go, you have to be cognizant of the language that's used.
True. I think you have to perhaps adjust yourself to the customer environments and talk the same lingo that they are familiar with. Otherwise, probably you're going to scare the hell out of them. Like if you introduce.
So that's why it's also quite important that at the beginning you do a lot of listening.
True. Yeah, I think that's very vital for a consultant to have the ability to listen before you start.
Well, and by the way, that's true if you're an internal consultant too.
True. Yeah.
Like a lot of business analysts and business architects internally need to listen a lot more, as opposed to just push things at the people in the business who will not welcome them with open arms.
True. And one more question, Roger, that was lingering in my mind is my own experience with the word business architecture. Like when I started my career in the middle 90s, the word was business analyst was something that I was quite aware of. There was this title called business analyst. Then it actually moved on to product strategy, later on. And then last 10 or 15 years, we see this word increasingly being used, business architect, business architecture. And I do work with the Open Group, and TOGAF has one of the main stay entities called business architecture, which is like one whole domain.
One of the circles in the top right.
Yeah, yeah, one of the, it's called BDAT, Business Data Application and Technology. So I do understand that space by reading upon it, and I have interacted with business architects also, which wasn't existing when I started my career, the title business architect. So it's like very difficult for people to, like when I go to do workshops, people ask me, okay, what is this whole body of knowledge called business architecture? We are aware of business process management, business analyst. And then I myself have seen a product strategy team who does a bit of the gray areas between the business and business analyst is too low level a role compared to what the business architect right now is relegated to, and so on. So I've seen how do you think actually has that, because you know how it really happened and you've been an authority in that space. So how did this word, a business architect, manifest itself over the years?
I think it's really interesting. It really depends who you talk to as to where it came from, at least for them or their organization. There's lots of organizations I work with where the business architect really emerged from business analysis, where people had large groups of business analysts to be able to determine the IT requirements for solutions that they were specifying or building out. Other organizations that have strong enterprise architecture background, and you before you mentioned Archimate and so on. People come from that type of world where the idea was to sort of look at the bigger picture, but still ultimately, at the beginning at least, very focused on making sure that we had reusable components that we could build from software, that we built appropriate connection. We had service buses and all these other types of things to connect things up, as opposed to just build an application. And enterprise architects were very much into that type of space. And the third thing I would say is that there are a lot of people who were coming out from the business strategy perspective. With one of the big challenges is people come out and identify their strategic intent, where they wanted to go, and the strategy and how they were going to get there. But it never really translated down very well to operations. And so it was great intention and a great idea, but to be able to turn that into action and for the work that people do on the front lines, it was just missing. So a lot of strategy people started to talk about, well, how do I take it to the next level? So all three of those are potential starting points for organizations. And so I find that when I talk to an organization, what I want to find out fairly early is, how do you think about it? But I would think maybe the biggest influence here has really come from the enterprise architects. And I think the enterprise architects were always trying to make sure we have great information technology. But the idea was you really have to understand what the business is about in order to figure out what the technology stack needed to do. And so it sort of started out there, just trying to determine the connection between the business and IT. But I think as we've gone over the last 15 years, it's become much more about the business itself. And so in a sense, the business architecture really is a form of strategy. And so how will I take my strategy and turn it into capabilities and operations that my organization needs to be doing every single day? And so it still has that sort of, you can tell where people come from.
The IT flavor to it. The IT origins.
Yeah, exactly. And then I guess one other aspect of this too is that in organizations which are very manufacturing distribution centric, it's always been about process. It's always been about supply chain management and things like that. And that's very process centric. So I think understanding the drivers from the nature of the business, manufacturing distribution will always be about process, will always be about simplification, cutting back time, reducing waste. That very much that quality management background is another one. There's a fifth now. Will always be about that. Whereas tech companies will always be about agility, capability, snapping things together, taking them apart, adding something in without destroying everything along the way. So, are you going after efficiency? Are you going after customer service? Are you going after flexibility or quality management and compliance with standards? So understanding the driver will tell you the sort of the flavor of business architecture. And even though all the components should be similar, the emphasis will be different.
Okay, true. Actually, that brings me to my next question, which is about the fact that if a business architecture is actually able to drive strategy within an organization, so he is actually very close to the C layer. And there is this joke that the only true blue business architect happens to be the CEO himself and nobody else, because he's got that power to drive operating models and change business strategy and drivers, as you said.
Yeah, I know. I think that's valid, because if you cannot find the person responsible for the business model and the operating model,
correct,
it will be by default the chief executive officer. It may not be done well. They may not realize that they're responsible for that.
True.
But yeah,
he needs to have so much of autonomy to execute and change the drivers at that level. Sometimes that's not that much of power is not invested in a business architect, although yes. I think
I agree.
I think
but one thing I will say that I really, these days, I think that I'm seeing more organizations move their business architects out of IT into strategy group.
Okay.
And I think that's a big step forward. Not that we're not concerned with IT, we still need enterprise architects, but the business architects and the enterprise architects have to work together. But the business architect will be connecting the strategies to the enterprise architecture.
True. I think, yeah, I've seen that movement that somebody acquires a lot of domain skills, then they get moved to the product strategy team as well, which is a good logical place for them to be and do the right job without too much of an interference. Right. But it has a huge backdrop in that, I think, because where does your work take you? Because the origins although were in IT, but as you said, given your association with the business manifesto that you're working on, so does it take you to non-IT consulting scenarios, like as you said, manufacturing, supply chain, automobiles, for instance, semiconductor industries? Because as you said, at the fundamental level, it's a process, and then you can abstract it to a value chain, and then you can break that down into certain capabilities, then put them on a heat map and say, okay, this part of your organization is green, red, and amber, and that kind of stuff.
All the things we do.
True. So I mean, how is that? So is there a body of knowledge within the Biz Manifesto that will help you to leverage it to non-IT backgrounds?
I think so. I think that the business agility manifesto, which is available online, just look up business agility manifesto.
Yeah, because where I'm coming from is I've heard a lot of people crib about the fact that it's too rooted in IT. It's got too much of an IT flavor to it. But when you really go talk to your business stakeholders, like there's a joke way back in India when they said Indian government is putting all the citizen data in the cloud, the farmer data in the cloud. And for him, the farmer, he only cares about the cloud is, okay, when is it going to rain? Cloud means only that. If it's too cloudy, when is it going to rain? That's all what he cares about. Exactly. So similarly, your business stakeholders don't have any inkling as to how you're going to do it, which IT, software, or whatever you're going to use. So he just wants the problem to be solved. So how do you think that body of knowledge is going to help people to leverage that and help them solve non-IT problems as well?
Well, I mean, I think the body of knowledge really provides some best practices for how you go about doing business architecture. You can take the same industry players and do the business architecture for them, and it might come out quite differently. But you might still apply the same practices, because you have to involve the strategy people and the choices they have to make. So. I mean, it also comes back to what is your proposition in the marketplace? I mean, you go to the classic value propositions. I mean, is your organization all about operational excellence? well, you're going to have a different architecture than if you're all about customer intimacy and all about relationships and repeat business and long-term retention. The results will be different. Your processes will be named differently. Your data will have different names on it. There might be different relationships among data items and so on, or different business concepts. Really, if you think about it, the standard frameworks out there for business architecture are just a way of going about doing it. It's almost like the process for process. If you think about it, how do I do process is a repeatable pattern, just like the people executing frontline work is repeatable. But there is another body of knowledge in addition to the ones we've worked on. I've been working with lately, and there is an organization called Business Architecture Guild.
Okay.
And the Business Architecture Guild has something called the BizBoc,
True.
the business architecture body of knowledge. In the past, I've been quite critical of that body because it's been too IT centric. But I'm happy to say they're gradually moving much more towards a business orientation. And in the last 2 years, I've been working with one group, which is sort of bringing together business architecture and business process management, and making sure they're aligned and connected, because originally the guild had a bit of an orientation that processes weren't part of the business architecture. There was something else, and it was all about identifying capabilities. You don't need processes if you're doing capabilities, and that's because IT people build capabilities. IT people don't execute processes other than their own. So, but the people in the business execute processes. They don't want to have to worry about the capabilities. That's somebody else's job to build them. So we're trying to pull these two things together now. And the latest version of the BizBoc, we've connected a lot of the dots up. So okay. I think I see these various communities coming much closer together than staying with their heritage from the past. So that's good news.
Okay. And Roger, one more thing, I chanced upon one of your talks wherein you said you actually consulted for this Mars chocolate group and did a lot of good, substantial amount of work over the years for them. And there I did see that one of the asks from the business was help us improve our bottom line by 15%, whereas the market was growing only at 2%. So how were you able to wear the hat of a business architect or a consultant for that matter and do that? Because you need to have deep down skills of that industry or that space to be able to do that.
And again, this is where it comes back to, are we really doing business architecture or are we really doing business strategy? True. So in that particular case, that organization, the marketplace was growing 2% per year. But the ask was grow 15% per year, compounded 5 years in a row. So it wasn't just 15% one time, it was like over 5 years, which is double your business profitably during that period of time and generate cash. So the challenge was huge. And so what we did, we just basically stepped back and said, well, what proposition are we going to use? And the response was, we're going to focus much more on the consumer rather than the customer. So for an organization that manufactures food products, the customer typically is a supermarket chain, or in North America, it would be like things like Walmart or Costco, the big retailers who distribute product. And so in the past, they would always focus on selling to the customer. And so the strategy change was, let's really raise visibility in the marketplace and pull product from the consumer through the channel to market. So that was a strategy change that had to be taken. And so that's when we also asked the question, the old question, back into the 80s and 90s from John Ruckert at MIT, Sloan Management School. He would always ask the question, well, in order to do that, what is absolutely critical? What are the critical success factors that have to be attained? And so one of the things in that particular case study, we asked the question, so in order to do this doubling that we're looking for, what is essential? And they said, well, marketplace is growing 2%. We have to go 15. We've got to bring new product to market. We've got to be really, really good at product development and launch. So that emphasis was put, well, let's go look at the processes around that. How can we make that much, much better? How can we reduce our time to market? How can we make sure we understand what's important in market so we bring the right products to marketplace and so on? We have to get new categories. And the other thing they realized is that would not even be enough. They also realized that in order to do it, they had to acquire capacity, they call it, acquire capacity. But capacity also meant getting new lines of business. And so one of the things they did as part of, and this was a global initiative, they acquired Wrigley. And so all the Wrigley's gums,
the Wrigley gum,
and the sugar products and things like that. Was Mars was mostly chocolate centric. The Wrigley was mostly sugar centric. So they could acquire that organization. And so they acquired Wrigley, and it was a very large spend, where even Warren Buffett got involved in financing all of that. And so they brought that in, and that was a big raise in terms of the revenue. But then about 3 years ago now, we were actually asked to come back in and help integrate Mars Confectionery with Wrigley, and to make it one company, not two, because even though they acquired, they ran separately for a while, and now it's all integrated under one. And so we used business architecture to define out what we need to do in the first place, and we had a new process map. And also, while they're doing it, they replaced their SAP at the same time.
Oh, with what?
And it worked. It went under budget, right on time. Everything worked on the go live date. It was incredible to see.
Oh.
But now
sorry, Roger, just curious. They replaced SAP with SAP with what actually?
No, they're basically new version, new release.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But in the new release, they're also going on to one global instance of SAP with like 80 countries. So that's not a trivial thing to do either.
Oh, okay.
So, then in integrating Wrigley, it wasn't just getting everybody onto the same IT platform. It was also getting all the processes consistent, and making sure that customers were dealt with by someone from Mars/Wrigley, not a Mars salesperson, account manager, and a Wrigley account manager. So the operations were different. All the processes around sales and customer support were different. And so, but we basically worked off the same architecture in order to do the integration.
True. And one surprising fact was, as you said, the major part of the revenue comes from pet food or something like that, which is a different.
As a corporation, pet food. Mars is number one. It's the biggest pet food company in the world.
I mean, that was new to me. I got to know from your talk.
Yeah.
So, that's true.
So
did that mean you actually did have to wear a gold rat hat or something like that? Because this requires some bit of logical analysis more than just business architecture, that you increase your line of products and increase capacity and the capability and all that sort of stuff. So I think what were your sources of inspiration for that?
I think the one big lesson learned that we have is that all of this is iterative. Okay. It's very much this agile style of iteration, do something, move on it, come back, reconnect the dots, because there might be people who argue, well, let's get the data all together. Let's get good data quality, good master data management, get it all figured out, and then our processes will work better, our systems will work better. Yeah, that's fine, but your processes also have to work in the meantime. So what we would do is we move through a cycle more quickly if we can, so that we could then say, okay, well, if you do this to your data, your process is going to change. Your process is going to change. Therefore, you need new capabilities. If you change the capability, that capability is used in 10 processes, so it better work for all of them. And now, how are we going to measure all of that? Well, and so you learn as you go. Okay. And you cannot say you need to get everything in one time.
So they were patient enough to go through the iterations.
Well, you have to solve a problem in the short term.
True.
I mean, you can't say wait with us. We'll be a couple of years, then you'll be okay. You got to do something up front, but then you can't rest. And I think that the big difference we're seeing today is people are starting to take it seriously. That business architecture is not a project because you have a transformation. True. Matter of fact, I've stopped talking about transformation, because By the time you get through a transformation, it's time for another transformation. So it's a new way of life. You need to be doing this all the time. Otherwise, you can't be agile in market.
True, true. It's like flowing water. It's so dynamic that whatever your process today need not necessarily be after 6 months or a year. So it requires
Right.
that mindset continuously and so on. So how do you think how much of this is going to actually, because I also saw that there is some static parts and dynamic parts to the business process, as you pointed out in one of your talks, that the static parts need to be there, because if you see the erstwhile, the banks which still from which help us to draw money and work as needed, although fintech is kind of disrupting that space hugely. The backend is written like in the 1960s and 70s in COBOL, still runs well.
People are afraid. They don't want to change it.
True,
They're
that's right.
afraid
So
if
those
they
core
touch it,
processes, they
they're
don't
gonna
even
mess it up.
people. It's like a black box. Nobody wants to open it up and
Right.
create a Pandora's situation. So they're happy changing the nice UI look and feel on the business side of
Right.
things. So how much of the BizBox knowledge or the business manifesto touches upon? I think I could guess from your work that you talk about some static parts and dynamic parts in the business. So the static parts are probably your systems of records or something like that you don't want to change. And the dynamic parts are probably the abstractions on top of that, which would be loosely sitting, and you could probably change that.
Yeah, but I think even today, even the static parts are moving to the cloud, right? So,
True.
so
yeah.
so
But still, it is
even this.
Yeah, surprise of surprise,
Yes.
banks have not been touched so far. I mean, it could happen any moment. Like the Uber overtook the taxi industry, banks could be disrupted any moment. You're true.
That's right. And the question is, if you're an organization and you think everything is static, you really have to be looking out for disruption. And do you want to be disrupted, or we're back to Clayton Christensen's great work called The Innovator's Dilemma. How do I make a change when I'm doing so well? But if I don't make that change, I'm going to be eaten alive by some upstart organization. And
True.
and unless you're Microsoft and you can buy them, so
True.
it's very, very, very difficult. But I think this is why this needs to be on a cycle. We tend to sort of want to revisit this on an annual basis and do it just before budget time. So we'll look at, we call it the pain and gain, which is the heat maps. We'll look at that before budget time if we can get the organization to adopt that idea, so that you can then say, well, where are the threats if we don't do something? Where should we be investing in change? So we're always looking at what's coming. We're always looking and saying, how do we want to make a change? And and there's a good question as to, do you basically cannibalize your own business before somebody else does? That's a strategy question.
True. Actually, rightly said, because I'm reminded of this thing here that, if you don't disrupt yourself, somebody else is going to do it any which ways. And these days, you don't need to know too much about that domain to disrupt. Like guys who disrupted the hotel industry had nothing to do with the hotel industry. All the Hiltons of the world, the Kempenskis of the world were overtaken by Airbnb. And similarly, Uber had nothing to do with it. So there's some guy with a brilliant idea comes and says, okay, let me go to this sector. So he creates an entire new blue ocean.
Even financial services. I mean, the disruption in payments did not come from banks.
Yeah.
It's come from Apple. It's come from
Facebook, for instance. Facebook, WhatsApp,
exactly.
Google Pay, and they had nothing to do with. So all your domain knowledge of knowing this is how erstwhile banking works is actually going to be taking a huge this thing. So I've heard about this former head of Microsoft, Ravi Venkatesan. He had a nice thing to say about this, which probably summarizes the role of what a business architect should do. He said, banking is important, not banks. So I think that's brilliant, the way he said it.
Well, it's interesting, and this is why the architectural aspect is so fascinating for me, because
correct.
A lot of people will say things like, basically transact a payment or something like that, but that process will always be there. The payment process will always be there.
Yeah.
How you do it, who you do it with, is going to vary.
Exchanging value needs to be there fundamentally, as you said, but how do you do it
absolutely.
Is only the gateways and the funnels are going to change.
And I think that's why on an annual basis, have a look at it. And we say pain and gain. A lot of people do heat mapping based upon pain, but it's pain against the current model, as opposed to where's the strategic gain if I do something different. So really what I'd like to be able to do is work on things which are strategically differentiating and will continue to be so, and also not performing well. So I want to prioritize there, was quite often business architects only focus on something. They call it maturity, but it's really pain.
True.
But you need to be more than that. And then, so you have to keep looking in the outside world, seeing what else is out there, seeing what might be coming, and try to, you have to come up with a strategy. Are you going to run parallel paths on something? Are you going to acquire someone and then gradually rebrand it, bring it over to you and replace your old stuff? Those old systems, acquire a fintech if you're a bank. I'm sure they've all done that. Things like a blockchain. What's blockchain doing to banks? You have to start looking at that and say, well, how do I get good at doing blockchain, be a trusted source of information? How do I do that? And when do I? That's the other thing. When do I do it? Because you can also be too soon.
True. Yeah.
So that's why the chief execs are paid the big bucks, right, to make those kind of decisions.
Correct. True. That is true. So I just have a few other questions on this.
Sure.
You had some interesting take on governance is management about management. So can you explain that, Roger, a bit?
We're seeing as people get more mature, governance is becoming an issue, or an interest at least. And I really talk about sort of three kinds of governance. One is governance versus standards and compliance. Another is about compliance. Do you comply to the standards? If you're writing BPMN, is everybody using BPMN? They're using it in a similar way. Is your model a high quality model? Can we put it in with all the other ones and have them connect properly? Those types of things. That's always a good starting point. You're, more on the lower end of maturity. It's a good place to start. The other part is governance over change. So how do I make a decision about what should be prioritized, where to put my scarce resources? And this is a big shift for organizations, because they're used to doing functionally driven change. So somebody in finance needs something. So once a year, they pitch a project. I want to do a project to fix this, and so on. And you look across the whole organization, everyone's throwing these ideas up. And then how do you pick? But you're picking among projects, but there's no connection among them. The architecture needs to connect these things up. And so governance over change should be driven by strategy. It should be driven by performance. It should be driven through architecture. And so you should be building things architecturally. So I shouldn't build 8 payment systems. I should build one and share them across the whole organization, right? That type of thing. Mm-hmm. So that's governance over change. And the third one is governance over performance. And so you get much more mature. Now you've got performance data. You have people who are responsible for the end-to-end process, not just the functional piece of the process. And they're monitoring performance all the time and seeing what needs to happen. Of course, a performance gap will lead to a change. So that all this stuff all connects together. So this requires,
it's linked to the metrics, and then whomever you interest with that can get a part of it as well, and so on, like that kind of thing.
So that's more mature governance. So governance needs to be at the right level. If I find that if you take the old maturity models, or like the 5-level maturity type models, if you're trying to be a level 4 organization and you're a level 1 organization, don't put in level 4 governance, because it's gonna crash and burn, and it's not going to be pretty. The executives won't be ready for it because they're going to have to change. So you have to gradually move your way up. And so, but it does ultimately require accountability for process performance in order to have that working well. And that means that those executives or the senior managers may be responsible for performance. The work that people do is the performance of the work that they do, even though those people don't report to them. And it's really, really hard for people to get their heads around that. I'm working much more collaborative style. So, but people are starting to go there because they realize the customer doesn't care about your org chart.
Oh, yeah,
The customer cares about the results, and you want someone internally responsible for customer results, regardless of your organizational structure. So this is, people are trying to do this now. Most people are not doing a great job.
Okay.
Because they don't understand the cross-functional nature of it.
True. I think I'm reminded of that hotel owner and the hotel manager kind of analogy. I'm not sure, was it your analogy that you brought forward in the BizBox or something like that? So they talk about governance is about the hotel owner, and management is about the guy who's doing the billing and who's the hotel manager. So if the hotel owner wants to take off on vacation, so then he puts a governance in place, and then the manager takes over.
Yeah, but I also think, though, when you start talking about governance, you're also talking about culture.
True.
And it's culture of the management team. And so even though they might be managers over a certain functional area, they have to really understand how their action affects people downstream and ultimately the recipient of the service that's being delivered. If they don't understand where they fit, they'll optimize something for themselves, which will make it worse. They might save money for in their own group, but it costs 5 times more to fix it later because we didn't get it right up front. Even though their budget might have to go up and others might go down. You have this very, very challenging issue about sorting all of that stuff out.
I think
we're actually now playing with the executives' processes. That's what we're doing.
I think you said understanding your customers is key if you have to really solve problems, because that level of detail people don't have in the business. They're just about, okay, this is a touch point, and if I solve this, I'm good. But then how is the other guy going to get to the shoes of the real guy who's going to use it? So that's really key.
Right on. And also a large part of that comes down to the fact that people are not measured on end-to-end results. They're measured on their department and their group. Okay. And when everybody's working towards their own measures, which might be counterproductive to what the customer values.
I think
getting that alignment is critical.
You kind of preempted my next question, which was about you said in your stuff that we changed the org chart to reflect the value chain. Can you explain that a bit? Because org charts are very political in nature. They're decided by the internal management, and you go wearing a consultant hat and say, okay, this is how we need to change these boxes. How does that? How easy is it to convince, or how difficult it has been to make that change? Based on the value streams.
Again, I think it's really interesting.
Very radical, actually. That's a very radical thought.
It is. It is. Well, because executives are very happy to change the responsibilities of the frontline workers and the behavior and culture and how they're measured. They're not so quick to change themselves.
True. Change is hard, and
yeah, but they're fine when it comes to other people having to change, but not for themselves. And so that's you're fighting. You have a resistance from the people who are the most powerful.
True.
So you have to fight this challenge between, if we don't make these changes, we're going to suffer as an organization. Okay. We're not going to do well, and none of us will do well in the medium to long term. So it requires some tough executive decisions about how we're going to manage. Interestingly enough, I find that family-owned companies are much better at it than organizations which are, basically traded on a stock exchange, where, short-term results are good because everybody will get bonuses. But in family-run businesses, the family is very concerned about the long-term value of the asset called the organization that they built. And so you tend to get a much more longer-term thinking, not always, but I mean, but much more a tendency to think, what's this going to be like in 5 years, as opposed to, will I get my bonus next year?
True. I think, and probably due to the fact that they have tighter control or grip on the business than a privately traded company, wherein they're answerable to the stock shareholders and the board and so many other entities. Here it is, I think the grip on the business is quite, so it's easier for them to make the changes that you probably would advise them.
But at the same time, we've seen other organizations, there's a very strong movement right now towards self-management, where the elimination of hierarchy.
True.
If you look at some of Doug Kirkpatrick's work.
Yeah, I think you only mentioned about Zappos getting away with zero management, and they're trying to move with completely self-managed workforce.
A better example actually is Morningstar. They make tomato products in California. They started out with no management structure at all, and they're the most profitable, the biggest, highest quality. Everybody loves to work there. They don't lose staff. People feel empowered, and it's all negotiated amongst peers. You know, I mean, to me, that's sort of the ideal level 5 type of organization. But there aren't many. But people are definitely experimenting with this model now.
True. I think they have this many movements called holocracy, agenda shift, and those kind of frameworks.
Same thing.
Yeah. So they're like, you know, you guys decide whom you want to work with, a buddy culture. But at the end of the day, you're measured on the outcomes that you bring to the table. And, you know, it's not that you just walk away without any responsibility, but well, you do have,
but as Doug Kirkpatrick says at Morningstar, he said, well, it wasn't like we don't have management. We just don't have managers.
Oh.
So we still, as a matter of fact, it's quite interesting that if there are issues to be dealt with in a flatter organization like that, it comes to light much sooner, because you don't have to worry about reporting up and down the org chart and people not looking good.
Correct. Some people might think it's too utopian, but I think, as you said, it's about time companies actually are gravitating towards that, with social distancing also there. I think
that's
probably
very true.
The future is going to go that way, whether exactly. That's going to be more, because that's how there's no longer a hierarchy. It's all like dots connecting to dots and then solving problems.
They still have processes, they still have data, they still have IT, they still have roles and responsibilities, they still have performance measurement and management. It's not like they don't have all those things. It's just that the structure underneath it is a little bit different, but it's a massive cultural shift. Like Morningstar, which I say is the best example I've seen, they started from day one with that model.
Oh,
so that made it a little bit easier. Whereas
so
Zappos had to turn
the right
over.
kind of people. They perhaps hire the right kind of people who fit that culture, right? Other it's very difficult.
Right on. I mean, the most critical process at Morningstar is attracting and retaining people.
Oh, okay.
Because you have to fit. You have to fit. You have to be comfortable working in that model, and not everybody is.
Correct. People who are used to power and status and authority will find it very difficult to get.
And we talked about Zappos. When Zappos turned over, it didn't work well right at the beginning.
True.
Because you had all these supervisors didn't know what to do. Former supervisor didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
So
that's true. I think the increasing influence of AI, I think we definitely are going to move to a world wherein machines will perhaps do a little of human intervention.
So what I think what all this says is that your business architecture is still going to be critical, maybe even more critical, because you have to know how the pieces fit. And you have to know that if I pull this piece over here, this other one over there is going to fall off the table.
Very true. Yeah.
So being able to anticipate unintended consequences and the impact of change is what a good business architecture should be able to give you. And then when I do go to make a change, I'm ready for what otherwise may have been surprised about if I didn't know how everything was connected. So
I think it's increasingly becoming more important with AI now, because the crisscross and the areas are getting blurred, because how much of it is human facing, how much of it is being automated using a machine. And so do you encounter these kind of things in your consulting assignment, like with the advent of AI? How are you going to propose this new value chain that is there? Because now the actors are, some of them are human, some of them are machines. So how do you, have you ended up actually creating those complex value chains,
well,
which are
it's interesting. We actually have one client who I know they've named all their robots.
oh human
So
names?
human names.
Okay.
So they talk about the robots as though they're human. I think, again, I would still come back to the idea that says, even if you're using artificial intelligence,
It still
you just
needs to
change
have a
it.
process. Yeah.
You still need to have a process. It's part of a process. There's an organization I'm working with here in British Columbia that that assures the safety of technical systems, things like electrical systems, gas systems, elevators, things like that. All these technical systems, they basically make sure that there's inspections and that people are qualified and certified and have permits and things like that. They basically put in a machine learning system, algorithm, that allows them to determine where to inspect. So whereas historically it was people in the field that say, oh, I have to inspect this company because sometimes they're not compliant and so on. They would, because they can't inspect everything because it's just too much. And so they put in this machine learning system, and from the moment they put it in, they now, using the same number of inspections total, they've discovered double the number of hazards and non-compliances, because the AI system is basically saying, we're not going to change your inspection, but we're going to make you smarter about where to inspect so that we meet our mission, which is to have a safe province of British Columbia. Okay. So, but it's still in the process of enforcement and compliance. But it's just one tool. And now they're looking, saying, where else can we use that type of intelligence to be able to make better decisions?
True. I think, like, initially when DevOps started helping Agile, it started bringing to all the surface the bugs and the dirt in the gut area typically of a company. And then, it started bubbling it up. And then, as you said, too much of automation can create a lot of false positive and a lot of rework for companies to be worried about, and spending engineering time on that. So I think but once it stabilizes, probably in a good stage there. Otherwise, it might lead to a lot of, false alarms saying, oh, we have a lot of work on our table to be done. But which is, in a way, it's good, because it's going to preempt you of all the wear and tear that happens in the system. So I think that's interesting, Roger. I think just probably one or two last questions, and I know we can talk a lot on this subject, and you have a huge
on all of these subjects.
Yeah, you have a huge history of consulting in this area, and a rich experience as well. So what do you think a person should do actually to become a business architect and a good business process consultant? What are the kind of things that, does he need any kind of certifications, or how does he need to equip himself with that kind of thing in his armor to go out there and do his job well? What are your recommendations? What kind of books do we need to read, or courses that he needs to take?
It's interesting. So I've not really found any really good books which cover it the way I see it. That's one of the reasons why. I mean, I could have said this for the last 18 months. I'm writing another one, but I just can't get around to finishing it. But there's a lot of, I've written a lot of articles that people can download. If you go to our website, ProcessRenewal.com, then there is a series of, think about 10 or 11 articles on various aspects of business architecture. That might be helpful. I would join the guild, Business Architecture Guild, because for, I think it's like $125 a year, you get 2 updates to the BizBox. You have access to reference models. If you're in transportation, there's a set of models already, which give you a start towards that. So you get a lot of good stuff. It's a really good source of knowledge as well. And it's being updated.
Do they cover fintech as well? Sorry, Roger. Do they cover fintech as well, the BizBox?
Yeah. Well, they cover financial services. I don't know if it actually is like specialized into the fintechs.
Okay.
But I mean, but a lot of the things they're doing, you're going to find similar processes and capabilities and information definitions sitting there as well. So again, depending upon your industry. I mean, if you're in the insurance industry, there's a great set of stuff around Panorama, which is all the models around the insurance and the reinsurance industries. So if you look around, you'll find models that will educate you about your industry. But then the question is the practice of business architecture. And I think that the challenge there is to get the opportunity to apply it. So what I recommend, I see a lot of business analysts want to become business architects. They just basically say, okay, when you're given a business analysis task, step back a little bit and say, how does this fit into the bigger organization? Try to connect those dots up. And make sure you don't just launch off into your little piece of work without seeing how things fit. You just gradually, you can take it on yourself to practice a lot of these types of techniques. And so I think that, you know, like I say about business analysts, there are many business analysts out there. Maybe I might get myself in trouble by saying this. Maybe 10 or 15% of them will become great architects. So, but you know, if you don't try it, you won't know.
What you're good at and what you can leverage on. True.
Yeah, and whether you get the opportunity too, you may not get the opportunity. So, but obviously, always ask the question: Who cares? Who cares about what I'm doing? And can I connect what I'm doing to what everything else that's happening around there? And gradually, I'll start to think if you start to think like a business architect, you'll get the opportunity that goes along with all of that.
Okay. And one more question, Roger, how do you think this move towards product is actually influencing business architecture? Because you have product managers and product strategy teams who are actually guiding how, and it's actually the whole industry is now moving from project to product. So there is a clash of the roles wherein what a business architect gets to play and a product manager gets to, like, probably some companies call them as product managers, and probably the same guy goes to another company, he might be called a business architect. So what's your thought on how they work?
I think you can have product managers, but they might have a narrower line of sight than a business architect might have. Okay. I think that the business architect has to work very closely with the product managers now, because they should be looking to the future, and you should be gaining insight from what they're doing and making sure your architecture can support their journey. And so I think the business architect has to pull together multiple points of view, multiple players in the organization, and try to come up with a path or a set of models which represent them well. So that's the challenge. But it's fun. It's a fun job.
Fine. So thanks, Roger. And one more thing, one last question to you before we wind up is, what is an advice that we would give to your 20 years self, like when you started, like just when you're just about to start your career, let us say you're just at that point now, taking yourself back in the journey, what is an advice that you would do differently to your younger self that, you know, that people can take away from this conversation, that, you know, what would you have done differently? Or if you don't want to change anything and you feel everything was a learning, that's also fine as an answer.
Well, I mean, I do think it's important to be patient and learn a lot and learn as you're going.
True.
But I also think it's really quite important to take an external view, an outside-in view of the world, because your organization and the work that everybody does there is just part of something bigger. And I mean, even if you come back to chocolate bars, I mean, yes, I know it's important to get all it right, but without that external market, without understanding what's going on, you won't be able to make the right decisions, or everybody will be fighting over decisions. So I'd always say, step back, have a broader view, take a perspective, and make sure that you have you can have an impact on the bigger issues that the organization has. I also think that's important for career advancement.
True. I think
If you show that
big picture view of this problem.
Yeah.
How do you think one should update oneself, like attend seminars, meetups, conferences, read books, or rubbing shoulders with your peers?
I think you should always read. I like to read articles, and actually LinkedIn is a really good place to go these days, because people are writing pretty good stuff there. So I would always be sort of taking a bit of time each week just to see what's going on there. But unfortunately, I think the best place to really gain a lot is to go to the conferences. And it's not just the information exchange. That's good. It's the discussions and the collaboration and
the networking.
And I know it's the networking. And what you find is that all of the people up there who are apparent experts or gurus or whatever you want to call them, they're all really happy to sit down and talk to you for a while. They're very open people. And so you can learn a lot just by talking to a John Zachmann or Ron Ross. If you're at one of these events, and even just talking to other people from other companies. The problem is with the way we're doing things today through Zoom and Teams and all the other tools. When you're listening to someone, you're not collaborating with others, and it's hard to get out there and have that sort of open sharing. So, but one of the things we're trying to do, I'm involved in a couple of big conferences. There's one next week, 2 weeks, called Building Business Capability, BBC conference. And in that event, in designing that event, we've designed a lot of what we could call practitioners chats, where it's an hour of people with an interest in a topic. And there'll be a moderator, but the moderator's not going to say anything. They're not going to present anything. It's just going to be people trying to collaborate and communicate with one another. I think we're going to have to see more of that, because we're missing that peer-to-peer collaboration when we all get together.
True. I think I just saw one of your talks, like a round robin, yourself, Ron Ross, and John Zachmann. All of you were going for a limited period of 2 or 3 minutes on some topic, and then you do your brain dump and leave the stage to the other guy. It was very nice, actually. A very unconference kind of pattern.
Yeah, well, we're trying to, because what we're seeing, we believe strongly, the experience is important.
True. I think
not just the knowledge.
You'll be flooded with a lot of real practitioner point of view experience, which takes years to gather otherwise.
And I can honestly say that I teach. I do a lot of teaching, and as I say, right now we're doing the fourth year undergraduates at the University of Toronto with 120 students. And I said something last week, and the student that went on to the chat and said, "However, last time you said this, and those two things don't work together." And I said, "You're absolutely right." So I also find one of the best ways to learn is to teach.
Yeah, I think very true.
You learn so much from your students, and there are a lot of people with a lot of good knowledge. Just go and listen as much as you can.
True.
And participate.
So this teaching is a part-time stuff, Roger, or
yeah, it's probably about a third of what I do is teaching.
Oh,
okay. It's interesting now. A lot of the business architecture we run a lot of business architecture training, but there's one I'm doing here at the University of British Columbia. We're doing one day a week for 3 or 4 weeks, and I have people from all across Canada. I have people from Australia. So what's happening now, at least with the virtual education, people can come in from anywhere.
Oh, okay.
As long as you're happy to get up at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Good. So thanks, Roger. So really nice having you on the show and share your deep insights on all of these topics. It was wonderful talking to you. And before we go, what is your book going to be about? What is the theme of the book? So you don't have to
Well,
give out the
it
title,
is.
perhaps, because you will still
No,
need to.
I'm pretty sure it's going to be called collecting, connecting, and correcting the dots.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
Which would be like a guide to business architecture.
Okay. So it's going to
But,
be an advanced one above the one you already written.
oh yeah, for sure. This is more about business architecture. The other one's a bit more about process. But if people want sample chapters, a lot of the chapters are already online. You can pull them down from our website. So.
Okay. Thanks, Roger. So I think I do look forward to another conversation when we probably talk about your book and your association with the BPTrends and BIS Manifesto. We didn't have time for all of that. So I think we probably will continue on the conversation on that separately. Sure. Otherwise, wishing you a great week ahead, and thanks very much for sharing your valuable time.
Thanks, Karen, for setting this up. I appreciate it. It was good to talk to you.